Om Ajnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Dhena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah.
Vaisesika Prabhu. And Vaisesika Dasa is a veteran monk, author, and spiritual guide. He travels throughout the world sharing knowledge gained from 4 decades of bhakti yoga practice and dedicated to spiritual entrepreneurialism. Speaking at corporations, universities, nonprofits. I think he was just at the Salesforce Tower. Amazing. Yeah. He teaches universal principles of personal spiritual development. Renowned for his wisdom and inspiring speech, he has a way of making ancient yoga wisdom and practices relevant and accessible. Please welcome Vaisesika Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Is this the first Tuesday? Or you have regular Tuesdays, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this I started in San Francisco in 1973 at a little temple that we had on Valencia Street. And now to see the program back here in San Francisco is very heartfelt. And it's so nice to be with all of you here. So having time to talk about the wisdom of Bhagavad-gita and discuss it is one of the main programs for advancement in devotional service. Comes under the category of Shravanam Kirtanam, or hearing and chanting. And we just came from Salesforce. There were quite a few people there, maybe 45 people in the audience, and then more online. There's usually a lot more online than there is in the classroom there. We find that people are very interested in finding a way to get in touch with their spiritual side, because they're sensing that even with a modicum of material success, they're not really satisfied. And we find that people flock towards these topics of mindfulness. The topic for tonight at Salesforce was taking conscious control of your lifestyle or of your life. And I asked a lot of people why they had come before I started speaking, and they said that they were interested in the topic, looking to find a way to balance their lives more, and especially at the beginning of the year, people are interested to restart and find a way to find some inner happiness. So maybe I can ask you all the same question. What brought you here tonight? What was your main impetus for coming? Yes?
I heard you speak at the opening, the grand opening, and I just wanted to hear you speak again, because I didn't realize that you were a direct disciple from Prabhupada until after you left, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't get to talk to him. I just thought it was beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks for coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Anyone else? Yes?
From what I've seen, there's a whole spiritual community that's thriving under your leadership. And I know my own spiritual life, I could definitely use a lot of guidance, a lot of help, and a lot of work. So just looking to get some inspiration from you, sir, and associate with devotees and come to this nice center.
Thank you. Yes. The practice of bhakti is really a culture of guidance. And it's important to have guidance from many different angles in order to sustain one's practice. There's a lot of distraction in the world, and there's also a lot of opportunities to be disappointed. So it's one of the main principles of the practice of bhakti, to find good mentors and guides and people who can support you among peers, among those who are senior and so forth. It's really a sustaining factor. Good to see you again. Anyone else? Yeah.
I had met you probably a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. You know, I'd come down to your program.
Yeah, Mountain View.
Mountain View,
Yeah.
And so, and I came to the morning program, and then you had like a book selling.
Oh yeah, I remember when you came.
Yeah. So I stayed for most of the day.
You happened to come there on a day when we were doing book
yeah.
distribution
So I
training.
didn't get, you know.
Right.
to hear
You look so familiar, and then now I've placed when I met you that time. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was excited. I know you've been coming, and I haven't been able to be here. I wasn't here in the opening, but I've been coming as much as I can, and I'm just happy you're here.
Happy you're here. Great to see you again. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I'm usually bored at lectures, and I have a hard time sitting in at classes, but I've been coming to these programs for a couple months, and every day something, every time I come, someone and when you spoke also, I was very inspired. You say something new, some new angle, you know, to look at life, and I really appreciate it. I'm glad to have a place to come.
I'm glad that I have a place to come too. And, I find that even one new idea can change my life, or getting a little encouragement can carry me forward. We were just talking at Salesforce about the power of speech, because as I think I'll talk about in a minute, the yoga begins with the tongue, and I can prove that through the various statements in the yoga wisdom scriptures, that yoga begins with the tongue. And I had asked everybody there at Salesforce if they could remember a statement they had heard, words somebody had spoken to them that impacted their life, either positively or negatively, that stuck with them. And everybody raised their hand. And some people shared. I didn't ask everybody to share, but we got enough of a sample to see. And one woman said that a teacher of hers had, after she had done poorly on a test, had said, "Oh, don't worry, it's just a small thing." And she said, you know, failure is the pillar of success, and you're going to do fine. And she got so empowered by that one statement that she said it sustained her career path and all the other progressive things she's done in her life. And so coming and hearing something that is intentionally meant to uplift you spiritually can really have a profound effect on life. In fact, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this monologue, or this discussion, that it's one of the main ways in which one advances in the practice of bhakti yoga is to have discussion among devotees. And you'll find that most of the scriptures that talk about bhakti yoga, for instance, the Bhagavad-gita and the Srimad-Bhagavatam, are discussions between devotees, among devotees. And some ask questions, some answer, and on it goes. And from there, great instructions come out. And those can be our guiding light. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes, Kishore Sham. Hare Krishna.
I like the way you have a way of taking fairly complex teachings from the Shastra and just bringing it into everyday sort of practical life. And I'm often kind of amazed by that. So, I mean, I like to hear you speak in general, but that's one of the things that I always look forward to is, you know, you'll be speaking some very practical sort of wisdom and then relating it to the Shastra. Shastra kind of has a way of grounding it, and so I always like to hear that.
Okay, great. We'll try to do some of that.
I'm sure you will.
Anyone else? Like when you first thought of coming down here tonight, what were you thinking?
Oh, too much rain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easier to stay home sometimes, but you know, you took the slog and made it over here. There's something about actually being in the location itself that makes a difference. Some people watch online and that's nice too, but I notice when you're right there, sometimes you can pick up something. Okay, how about if I tell you some of the things that we talked about at Salesforce today, because I have some ideas that I gave them in a handout. And the first is, and this will be about how yoga begins with the tongue. So I found a quotation that I included in the outline to start off with: words are free, it's how you use them that may cost you. And I was thinking a lot when I found that quote about the power of speech and what it means to us. And I told you I proved that yoga, the tenets of yoga are that yoga begins with the tongue. So this is from Bhagavad-gita, one of the very important bhakti scriptures in the 11th canto. Quote, although one may conquer all of the other senses, as long as the tongue is not conquered, it cannot be said that one has controlled his senses. However, if one is able to control the tongue, then one is understood to be in full control of all the senses. So, a scripture called the Padma Purana says, Atashi Krishnanamadi nabhaved grayam indriye sevun mukhi jivado swayamiva spuratyada. And this means that you can't see the Supreme with your material senses. However, if you do service, beginning with the tongue, then the Supreme will reveal himself to you. So the statement is, jiva, adao. Adao means beginning with, to start with, and jiva means the tongue. So miraculously, the statement is very clear that you should start service, and by that service, then Krishna will reveal himself to you, and you start with your tongue. So that's good evidence, isn't it? And also, in the Bhagavad-gita, Prabhu, I think the gain is just a tiny bit high here. In the Bhagavad-gita, in the 17th chapter, Lord Krishna talks about the austerities of the body, mind, and speech. And therein he says that he talks about speech being very important. And earlier in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, Arjuna asks a question of Krishna, and that is that, how can I tell that somebody is in spiritual consciousness? And he wants to know how the person sits, walks, and also speaks. And in his commentary to that verse, Srila Prabhupada says that this is the most telling factor or revealing factor about one's consciousness, how one speaks. So he goes on to say, does Srila Prabhupada, that a fool is not revealed until he speaks. And there's an old saying that he had nothing to say, and then he said it. So the consciousness of a person is revealed by the speech. And actually, the Srimad Bhagavatam goes on to say in a very poetical way that if you meet somebody that has a pure heart, when that person speaks, the vibration is different. And here's the poetical part. Bhagavatam says that the vibration of that person's speech touches Krishna's lotus feet, and it mixes with saffron particles. Therefore, when you hear it, it has a different quality. it actually moves you and makes you want to engage in devotional service. So those are referred to as saffron mercy particles. And the quality of the vibration is different. So there's a common understanding in the Vedas and the Srimad Bhagavatam, and that is that sound carries consciousness, and speech carries consciousness. So what one person may say the same thing as another, but based on the advancement or lack thereof of the person speaking, will be affected by the speech accordingly. So the speech is very important. Now, as far as the practice goes, there are a few important points to understanding the tongue and its role in our lives. One is a way to remember what a powerful force our tongue is in yoga, and that is that our tongue is like the rudder. In fact, it's even shaped like a rudder. When I was a kid, my father had a little boat. He built it himself. It was called an El Toro, small sailboat. And he kept it at Lake Merritt in Oakland. And he'd take us sailing over there sometimes when we were kids. And I remember wondering what the rudder was good for. It was just such a small thing that was near the back of the boat. And I pulled it out once. My father said, "No, pull it out and see." I said, "What is the use of this? Why do we need it?" And he said, "Pull it out and why don't you find out?" And when we pulled the rudder out, we couldn't go straight. We couldn't go the way we wanted to go. We went all over the place. So in a similar way, the tongue is like that. It seems somewhat insignificant compared to some of the larger limbs on the body, but it's instrumental in our lives in broadcasting what's in our consciousness, and of course tasting as well. It's another big function, and that's another part of yoga, which I'll go into in another time. But I'd like to just leave that impression with you about how your tongue is your rudder, and how you use it, and making sure that it's in place properly will direct you in the proper manner in the practice of bhakti, if you use your tongue properly. A statement I heard from a friend of mine who got it from his father, who used to instruct his son, that your word is your bond. Have you ever heard that? Your word is your bond? I always found that very helpful to remember. Whatever you say creates a kind of a bond. Can you think of any times in your life when you made a statement that bound you to something? What are general circumstances in which when we say something we're bound to it?
I do.
Yes! That's pretty good. And the reason I'm smiling is that's what was the first thing someone said at Salesforce too. Actually what he said was, no, he was with some friends and they were laughing. I said, "No, what is it?" And he said, no, it was just kind of a joke. And I said, what's the statement? He said, "I do." And I said, "That's no joke." And I pointed out that actually it's a legal part of the marriage. It's legally binding. In fact, there has to be a witness there. I know I've done a lot of weddings here in California. And you have to have a witness, you have to have a priest, and you have to have a witness that watches the two people say, "I do." And then the person who's presiding over the wedding also has to say, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," or whatever the case may be. And then it becomes legal. The pronouncement has to be there. It's bound then by the words. And you'll find also in courts of law, if you're in a live court setting and there's a judgment in your favor, and the judge says, "Now you get $1 million," and bangs the gavel. Do you get $1 million? Say yes. Yes, you do. Because it's empowered speech. And it's binding. You're bound by the speech. For those who know the power of speech, you'll find throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is talking about histories that go back thousands, sometimes tens or hundreds of thousands of years, people are very careful about what they say, because once they say it, they're bound to keep their word. And so this is an important aspect of speech. Now, looking at it from another angle, one of our conditions here in this world is a consideration that we're actually bound to the world. It said we're engaged in the process of what's called samsara, or repeated birth and death. We're held into this cycle, or bound to it. And how does one become unbound from the material condition of life? Well, the Vedas, going to the Vedanta Sutra, which is a summary of the Upanishads, says anavriti shabdad, which means that by sound one becomes uncovered, unbound. So by one kind of sound you can become liberated. By another type of sound you become more bound to the world. This is one of the teachings of the Upanishads. Anyarevahor sambhavad, anyarahura sambhavad, iti shushumatiranam yenas tadvich chakshire. Which means one result is obtained by listening to material sound, and another result is obtained by listening to spiritual sound, or producing it, either way. So the quality of our speech and the quality of the speech we listen to will determine the quality of our lives. This is one of the great formulas given to us in the Vedic scriptures. Another metaphor for speech is that our words are like seeds, or our words are seeds. And whatever we speak has an effect. It goes out in the world, it's creative. And the words that we hear also implant themselves in our hearts and our minds, and gradually they have an effect on our lives. So it begins with hearing, and then we have thoughts, and our thoughts determine our actions, and our actions determine the direction we go in life, and what our destiny is ultimately. Everything starts from a subtle level and then becomes manifest in a more gross or tangible way. And therefore, being attentive to one's speech, controlling the tongue, is one of the vital aspects and the beginning, the fulcrum of power for those who are practicing yoga, the yoga of the tongue. If you can control the tongue, especially in speech, then your mind becomes more clear. You're able to witness how the Supreme Spirit is near you, is next to you, and instructing you. And you're not disturbed by superfluous thoughts because of controlling the tongue and speech. So those are a few seed thoughts, and I'd like to hear some reflections from you. Reflections are anything that you heard that stuck with you, that seemed helpful or interesting. You can just reflect it back, any of the concepts, or if you have a question that you think you could bring out some more information for clarification. First, try reflecting back anything that you heard so far. What did you hear?
I think of speaking as kind of like almost a contract or a commitment, and you want to say things that are true because in a sense you're kind of committing to that. So I feel you know, like sometimes I'll use a hyperbole or something, and then I'll feel like the reader may, or the listener may hear something that I don't intend, and so therefore I've actually kind of misled somebody, you know, unintentionally, if it's not like, you know, being obviously, you know, sarcastic. So trying to strive for that precision of speech to kind of determine one's character, as opposed to being the kind of person who's fast and loose with dishonesty, I think. Which is kind of what I was thinking.
Yes, it's an important point, and one that I was just about to bring up also, and that is the austerities of speech. The first of, and these are listed in the Bhagavad-gita in the 17th chapter, 15th verse, where Krishna talks about the austerities of speech, and the first one is being truthful. So this has great implications for one's spiritual life. First of all, I'd like to come clean and tell you the first time I remember, probably wasn't the first time, but the first time I remember telling a lie. May I do that here in this assembly? We're here all amongst friends. Okay. I grew up with my parents and two brothers and a sister. I was closer to one of my brothers because he was near my age. The other ones were quite a bit older. And in our home in suburban Lafayette, my mother and father had an heirloom musical instrument. It was a bugle. The word was that it had been in the Civil War or something like that. It was a valuable piece. They had it displayed on the wall. And every once in a while, we could touch it, but never were we to take it down, what to speak of, take it in the backyard, which is what we did when my mother went to the store. So my brother Tom and I were back there playing with the bugle, and I think I was showing off like how cool I was that I could take it off the wall and take it in the backyard. And somehow, while we were playing, I totally forgot about it, and I just left it in the garden, like right in the flower bed, a priceless bugle. And so when my mother came home, she noticed it wasn't there. She went in the backyard, and she saw that it was planted in a flower bed. And she was fuming, and she said, who did this? And I was thinking, this is not going well so far. So I got to get out of this. And now, to give you more information, across the street from where we lived was my rascal friend, Denny Scardacci. And Denny was a real rascal, a bona fide, genuine rascal. He was always getting into trouble. And I knew my mother didn't really like him that much because he was such a troublemaker. So I figured I had the perfect thing to say when she asked who put the bugle here, because I didn't have anywhere else to go with this, so I said, Denny did it. Those words came out of my mouth, and a second later I realized the impact. As my mother turned, walked out the door, down the front steps of our house, and across the street, I could see her go all the way to Denny Scardacci's house. And in that time, which probably was a few minutes until she figured out that I had lied to her, I was mortified. Mostly I was mortified because I had actually, I was embarrassed that I had lied to her. And my whole world felt different. My whole relationship with my mother felt different suddenly. And when she came back, and just the look on her face to see that I had not told her the truth, besides the fact that she was so angry, really left an impression on me. And I remembered the power of those words. In fact, in my family, even to this day, my brother, Tom, who's 2.5 years older than me, when something happens, he'll say, Denny did it. Those words have become immortalized. It was Denny Scardacci. And these are impactful moments, the utterance that comes out of one's mouth. And telling a lie can have a great impact on one's life. Therefore, in the process of yoga, it is important that one is clean, starting with yam, niyam. So yam means you have to clean up the way that you deal with people in the outside world. For instance, you can't meditate after you've lied. If you just told a lie and you sit down and meditate, there will be waves of anxiety going through your head, and you won't be able to still them because the impact is so great. However, if you make it a habit, as Krishna recommends in the Bhagavad-gita, to always be truthful, then you'll start developing this integrity quotient that is very calming and centering, and that gives you the wherewithal to actually be introspective. But without that, it's very difficult to be peaceful or to take time to think about spiritual matters. So thank you, Kishore Sham. That was an important point you brought up about truthfulness. What else did you hear so far that stuck in your mind? Any points or thoughts? Yes, Hope.
What I was thinking of earlier, very interesting story, by the way. I love the childhood story. That was wonderful. Earlier, I was thinking of how, it used to only be that the tongue was our only speech, but now we have a whole new speech kind of online in our social media, like a personality and us speaking through social media. And it's interesting how that can be a very different person than who we are face to face. And I see it all the time where people say things that I think they would never ever say to someone's, if they're having a conversation with someone right there, because of this, in your home anonymity. Is that the right word? Did I say it right?
Yes.
Okay. And Kishore Sham said something interesting. He said, when we're online and typing, we actually have the time to stop and think about what we're typing, what we're saying. It should be the exact opposite, really. That, we would take more time to consider and be more gentle and kind and loving in our speech, but it turns the opposite for somehow with social media. So it's almost like the computer is now another tongue that we need to be aware of and careful of.
Absolutely. It's such a good point. It's an extension of our tongue, really. And I can put forward a theory about why it becomes a place where people feel free to let loose their passions on others. Just as when we're driving a car, I've noticed this. It's another place where people oftentimes feel more aggravated than usual. If somebody cuts you off or something like that. And here's how I've thought about it, and that is, let's just say that somebody cut you off, right? And maybe you feel suddenly a surge of anger coming towards that person. And what's some of the things you could do if that happened?
Honk.
You could honk, like really hard and long. Or, you could make some utterance against the person, or even a gesture. That's possible too. Of course, that's dangerous. There was an incident I read about 20 years ago up on Skyline Boulevard, that a man on a motorcycle and a man in a pickup truck got into an argument as they were driving, road rage. And the man on the truck suddenly jerked his wheel and hit the man on the motorcycle, and the man was killed. And it turned out that the man who was driving the truck was an upstanding citizen, never had been in any trouble, had 3 kids at home and stuff like that. But suddenly his whole life had changed within a nanosecond. Just by feeling angry, he jerked the wheel and killed the person, knocked him off the road. And, these things can come up suddenly. So now I was thinking that, say somebody cuts you off, and then that urge comes up to be angry at them, and then you notice that actually it was your mom driving the car. Then what would you do? You wouldn't be angry. You wouldn't make a gesture, you wouldn't say anything, you'd just be like, later on you'd say, hey mom, what were you doing? But you wouldn't become angry because there's a personal connection there. But it's so easy when you see cars just to become angry at the whole conglomerate of, there's apparently a spirit in there somewhere, but it's just kind of an impersonal object coming at you. And there's a desensitization, did I say that right? That takes place when we're online and we forget the impact. But that's also something that I always tell students, never get angry online. In fact, I've noticed that if somebody writes me an email and I feel the slightest bit of anger when I'm writing back, I always wait till the next day. Because even if I think that I'm writing something civil, it's probably not. It'll come out the wrong way. Because again, sound and our speech carries consciousness, and that also is, however we compose it on a keyboard and through the internet and so forth. And when it's desensitized, when we forget about the impact that it's actually having. It's even worse sometimes online because it stays there. Of course, all speech stays out there. And that was one of the points I was trying to make in the beginning when I was asking, have you ever experienced when somebody said something to you and it had a permanent impact on your life? And maybe it sticks with you now. And what we do, because Krishna, the name for the Supreme Personality of God, is all-powerful. He's called Satya Sankalpa. Whatever he thinks, whatever he desires, it's manifest. Whatever he says, it becomes reality. It is reality. And we're little parts of him. And just as he's creative, he can create whole worlds just by dreaming about them. So we're part of him. Our spiritual selves has minute power also. We create things. And when we say things, we're also creating. And they are also the things we say are altogether consequential in our lives and the lives of others. So being a human being requires being responsible. Otherwise, you lose the opportunity to refine yourself and to advance, especially in spiritual life. And bhakti really means refinement. It means to take away the sloth or the dross, the coverings, the gross coverings around our heart and around our minds, around our hearts and minds. And by doing that, our real selves are revealed, that are the most sublime, because we are parts of Krishna. And our relationships become much more relishable and intense when we're pure. So the process of bhakti is purification. Anyabilashita shunyam, sarvopadi vanirmuktam tatprapena nirmalam rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhakti ruchite. This is one of the definitions of the process of bhakti, which says that it's meant to purify the senses. And one of the senses that we use regularly is the tongue. So purified speech is very important in our lives. If you have envy in your heart and you write an email and put it on the internet, it will pierce somewhere. It will have a slashing effect somewhere. If you say it to someone, Krishna says this in the Srimad Bhagavatam to Sri Uddhava. He's talking about speech. And he says, if you have envy in your heart and you speak harsh words to others, it acts like a spear. It can actually wound the other person, can puncture their heart through your harsh words. It has effect. So the characteristic of a person, as defined by Rupa Goswami, one of the great masters of bhakti, who has reached the pinnacle, the topmost position of bhakti, is called nindadi shunya, which means the person's heart becomes free from the propensity to criticize others. One may point out things, one may even criticize if the circumstance warrants it, but the person's doing it not out of envy or out of maliciousness, but out of a concern to help the other person. And therefore the effect is different. So it's really amazing that we're little walking parts and parcels of Krishna, and that everything we do has consequence, and the words that we speak are creative. They're all significant. And therefore, if one is careful and watches one's speech, then this is one of the ways in which one advances in bhakti. In fact, Kishore Sham was just telling me that he had started reading the Nectar of Instruction today. It's a concise guidebook to bhakti yoga. And the first words in that book, written by the most famous teacher of bhakti yoga, Rupa Goswami, are Vacho Vegam. This first verse is all about how to control the urges that come up in our lives. And the first urge that he asks us to attend to be careful about, is the urge of speaking. Vacho. Vacho Vegam. Vegam means an urge. So he said, if you can control that urge, then you become a master. So yoga begins with the tongue. Now there's plenty of room up front, and there's lots of devotees come in, and about, looks like 200 more just came in. So please feel free to move up. I am vegetarian, and I did bathe at least 2 weeks ago, so it's okay. No, up here, come on up. Somebody take a front row seat. Box seats. Welcome everyone who just came in. How is it out there?
Rainy.
Rainy? It's good. We're just having a conversation here. And one of the topics is about the power of speech and how yoga begins with the tongue. If one can control the tongue, then one can control all the other senses. And I spoke a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam that says, if one has controlled the tongue, then it's known that he or she has controlled all the senses. And if one hasn't controlled the tongue, then it's known that one hasn't controlled all the other senses. So this is a good place to focus, and it's the beginning part of yoga, to use the tongue for service. For service. And that's exactly what the verse says that I quoted. Ata Shri Krishna namadi nabhaved grayam indriye sevon. Sevon means service. Sevon mukhi hijeva ado. The service to the Supreme begins with the tongue. Isn't that amazing? That's where it starts. So then I went on, I was talking about how Krishna says in the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita, the 15th verse, he lists the austerities of speech. So there are very specific things that you can attend to control your speaking. The first one is to be truthful. And we were talking about how if you're not truthful, then your mind will be disturbed. And you may implicate yourself more and more by not being truthful in your relationships and even legally and in many other ways. So telling the truth is a very important aspect of spiritual life and of meditation and of bhakti yoga and of pleasing Krishna, to be truthful. What do you think of that? Is it easy? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being it's easy as anything to tell the truth all the time, and 1 being that it's one of the hardest things that you have to do, where would you put truthfulness? Now be truthful about this. Yes?
Was there a story about a Brahmin that saw somebody who was being pursued by robbers? And, they went and they hid behind the bush, and then the robbers came and they asked the Brahmin, okay, we're looking for this guy, do you know where he is? Oh, sure, he's right there, because he'd taken a vow that he'd always be truthful. And then actually the robbers pursued and were able to do harm.
Our definition of truthfulness is a little different. When there's an emergency, this is a moral situation, ethical, and actually Socrates talked about this also. That is it actually truthfulness when you tell the truth and at the same time you sacrifice somebody else's life? And in a circumstance like that, protecting the person by not telling the truth. But that's an exception. And of course we don't want to take exceptions and make them the rule. But we find that morally, to protect an innocent person, one could not tell the truth. And that would be in a different category. But again, you have to be careful. And what was the question I asked? Oh, 1 to 10. How difficult is it to tell the truth? Would you say? It depends on whether there's robbers chasing a guy. Well, it's a good answer. It depends. It's not a necessarily straightforward thing. But just in your daily life, noticing situations where there's not robbers chasing somebody, and you have opportunities to embellish or not embellish, or withhold or not withhold, or if you told your spouse something slightly different, it might make it easier. What would you say? Yes?
I recently had a situation where I have divided loyalties between people who are buying, and trying to navigate speaking the truth to somebody to protect somebody, but at the same time perhaps betraying the trust of somebody else. And in that kind of situation, I feel like either way, you're not telling the truth, because you're either betraying or you're withholding. And in a situation like that, it's impossible to be truthful, because speaking the truth in itself is a falsehood, and then not speaking the truth is a falsehood. So there's certainly situations, and that was my day today. So yeah, I can say that there's times where it's pretty much.
That's why some people take a vow of silence.
Why didn't I think of that?
No, I mean, I'm not saying that you should have, but I'm just saying that these things are complicated. And a lot of it has to do with acting in good faith. Because we may notice ourselves whether we're being truthful or not, or whether the situation warrants it or not. And we do have a conscience as well. Actually, Krishna is there within our heart, and if we're attentive, he'll give us some indication about what is being truthful in good faith, and when it's important to maybe not be so, you don't have to be forthcoming in every situation with the information. But the fact is, you do have to be careful not to shade the truth for your own convenience, but better to be straightforward as possible. This keeps a clean consciousness. I'll read you the section of the Bhagavad-gita that this comes in. This probably gives a purport to it also, okay? Permission?
Please.
Yes?
Yeah.
Only 4 people said yes. Everyone else?
Yes.
Okay, and if you don't want to hear it, just cover your ears. We'll let you know when it's done. Okay, again, for those of you who are keeping score, it's the 17th chapter, and this is verse 15. And here, Krishna is listing the various austerities that one can perform. So this is called the austerity of speech. Austerity of speech consists of speaking words that are truthful, pleasing, beneficial, and not agitating to others, and also in regularly reciting Vedic literatures. Purport. One should not speak in such a way as to agitate the minds of others. Of course, when a teacher speaks, he can speak the truth for the instruction of his students, but such a teacher should not speak to those who are not his students, if he will agitate their minds. This is penance as far as talking is concerned. Besides that, one should not talk nonsense. The process of speaking in spiritual circles is to say something upheld by the scriptures. One should at once quote from scriptural authority to back up what he is saying. At the same time, such talk should be very pleasurable to the ear. By such discussions, one may derive the highest benefit and elevate human society. There is a limitless stock of Vedic literatures, and one should study this. This is called the penance of speech. Any reflections after that? One thing I noticed was that one should not feel compelled to correct those who are not his or her students. Prabhupada makes this point that it's not your duty to correct everybody in the world. They're not necessarily correctable. But if someone signs up and says, I'm under you and you please correct me, then you can do it. But you actually have to be careful even then because people are very sensitive. And this is the refinement of speech. How to tell somebody, give an instruction, but at the same time make it palatable so that they can accept it. One of the austerities of speech. Okay, so speaking, see, I told you 200 more people are coming in. Your speech should be truthful. That one's clear already, right? To some degree. Pleasing. One should avoid speech that offends. And finally, one should repeat sacred mantras. This was part of the austerity of speech. So this is important because by repeating the mantra, one purifies one's tongue, because the tongue is a sense, and it's a mind of its own. Have you ever noticed your tongue has a mind of its own? Did you ever get like a chip in your tooth or something stuck in between and the tongue just won't leave it alone? I just saw my dentist yesterday because I had a little chip and he had to sand it down. And he said, your tongue couldn't leave it alone, right? And I said, yeah, no matter what I told it. He said, yeah, it has a mind of its own. And senses are very interesting. They're loaded up with all kinds of knowledge-gathering devices, and they're very active and curious. And the tongue itself can be in various modes. It can be in the lower mode of darkness, it can be in passion, or it can be in goodness, or it can be transcendental. And when you use the tongue in service, it gets purified. I quoted the verse earlier, Sarvapati vinirmuktam tat pratvena nirmalam. This verse says that when you use any of your senses in service to our original divine source, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then that sense becomes purified. And it gets filled with light. And you can actually experience happiness through it. So the way to serve with the tongue is to repeat the mantra. So when have any of you here ever repeated the mantra, the Hare Krishna mantra? Are you familiar? If you've heard of that mantra or repeated it even one time, raise your hand. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. You have your hand up? Okay. Pretty much everybody. Okay, so that mantra, it's a sacred mantra. It's the most recommended of mantras. It's a repository of all other mantras. And if you take time to repeat the mantra and listen to it, you're performing seva with your tongue. Your tongue is serving. When I've done my seminar called Yoga of the Tongue, people ask, one person asked, what is it you do? Teach them how to do downward dog with your tongue? But actually the service, the yoga of the tongue, having the tongue serve means to repeat the names of the Supreme. So let's try it one time. We'll say one mantra together. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. That's service to God by repeating. So you can remember that when you're practicing your mantras, that this is the most essential type of service that you can do, is repeating the mantra. You want me to prove it? We just read here that you should back up everything that you say with scripture, right? Do you have an 11th canto, part 1? 4th chapter, last verse in the... 11th canto, part 1, yes. 2nd chapter, last verse. Is that where it is, Mukarvin? The verse I'm looking for? 2nd chapter, last verse. Just like magic, it comes out. May I? Does that mean I have to buy the whole set? Thank you so much. Okay. Now this is an amazing verse, and anybody who doesn't want to hear something amazing, I'm giving you a spoiler alert, so cover your ears. Is this the chapter, Mukarvin? 2? Second chapter, okay. I know it's the last verse. That's probably 55. Yep, that's it. This verse, I'll give you the Sanskrit for authenticity. Vrishrijiti hridayam na yasya sakshad darir avasha bihito pyagoganasha pranaya rasanaya tritangri padma sabhavati bhagavata pradana ukta. Here's the translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is so kind to the conditioned souls that if they call upon Him by speaking His holy name, even unintentionally or unwillingly, the Lord is inclined to destroy innumerable sinful reactions in their hearts. Therefore, when a devotee who has taken shelter of the Lord's lotus feet chants the holy name of Krishna with genuine love, the Supreme Personality of Godhead can never give up the heart of such a devotee. One who has thus captured the Supreme Lord within his heart is to be known as Bhagavata Pradana, the most exalted devotee of the Lord. What do you think? I'm interested in your impressions of that verse, particularly. What did you hear? Yes.
For me, I feel I'm no more lonely, or I just have someone who will always take care of me no matter in what situation I am, wherever I am. Even if I have my family, friends or not with me.
Yes.
But there is someone on whom I can depend on to anything.
That's really beautiful what you just said. Yes, really amazing. One time when I was a brahmachari, I was living in New York, in the old New York temple, 340 West 55th, between 8th and 9th. And I used to go out every day there in New York and distribute Bhagavad-gitas. And then it was December, and it got really cold, and it was near the end of the year. And the places that I was going in New York were starting to change and get a little more passionate. So my Sankirtan leader, the person there who was in charge of the book distributors, told me I should go traveling. And I said, okay, so who am I going to travel with? He said, you're just going by yourself. And I said, aren't you always supposed to go with somebody? He said, hey, Krishna's in your heart. I said, hey, yeah, okay, I'll try it. So they sent me out with this beat up old van, and I was driving down the freeway and realized there was no heat in the van. But I was thinking about what he had said about Krishna's in your heart. So I just went, and I had the most amazing 10 days where I met people who said, oh, why don't you just stay at our place? And everywhere I went, something very confirming about Krishna being in my heart came up. And hearing these verses is exactly what we like to hear, because there's always a sense in this world of impending separation from our loved ones and from the things that we value, because the world's so temporary. But when we make a relationship with Krishna, who's within our hearts and who's our best friend, he's called Suhrit, he's always there in our hearts and has our best interest in mind. And then we have a way of reciprocating and connecting with him, which is what I'm describing here as the chanting process. Then life becomes very hopeful and happy. What else did you hear? And I'm going to look at my watch because I have a tendency to just keep going. It's 7:10. Yes, we have time for a few minutes. What other things did you hear from that verse that stuck with you? Or what was your impression in general? Yes?
I guess just the last part, the most exalted devotee of the Lord. Whenever you think of the most exalted devotee of the Lord, you always think of, someone who's committed the greatest deity or has this very deep relationship with the Lord. And then any hand forms in incredible amount of service. And then you realize that chanting is the same process to get you there, and it just gives you more gravity when you think about it.
Yeah. And the mood there is of this verse is that if someone chants sincerely, this is what really attracts the attention of Krishna, who's in the heart. He's not looking for any grandiose offering, except for the sincerity we have in our heart. And in so many cases throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is this book, this is pointed out again and again. The essence of the practice of bhakti is our own sincerity to have it. And even if you're in a position right now in your life where you can't fully execute the process of bhakti yoga, if you have that burning desire in your heart, then Krishna will fulfill it. And at some point. And actually sometimes I like to point out, because I meet lots of people who have a strong desire to practice bhakti and to be more in contact with Krishna, but then they're obligated to so many things that keep them away from doing as much as they'd like to do. Does that sound familiar to anybody? 3 people, 4, 5, 6. I see some heads nodding. So I like to ask this question, because sometimes, I lived as a monk for 13 years in a temple, and I've seen many things. People come in, and I've witnessed, somebody might be living in an ashram, doing full-time service, but then thinking or wishing they lived somewhere else. Like they wish they were, in a house where they could watch videos or something like that. Or there may be somebody that's in a house with people who are watching videos, but they were wishing they lived in the ashram. So I like, which one's better? It really has to do with the desire we have in our heart. And there are always complicated situations in this world, because it's a complicated world. We're complicated because we're individuals. We all have free will, and we go our own separate ways. And then you add in the complexities of material life, the incompatibility of the eternal spirit mixed up in matter, which is a very cumbersome environment for us, because we're very refined by nature, but we're working in a gross environment. So when you add all these things together, it's a complex environment. And the thing that really shines through all that complexity is one's own sincerity to have devotional service. And that's the only thing ultimately that is important. And of course, if you have true sincerity, then Krishna will give you opportunities more and more to do more service. And in the meantime, if you bide your time, no matter what kind of situation you're in now, whatever kind of suffering you have to go through now, and you continue to hope for that time when you can do more service, this is actually, may I have 10th canto, 14th chapter? I'm really going to have to buy this set now. I'm going to read you the quintessential verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which describes the attitude that you can assume that guarantees that you go back home, back to Godhead. Dare I read that in this assembly?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. 10th canto is vast. It's the longest of the canto. That's why he's taking a little longer to find it, because there's many volumes in the 10th canto. Does anybody here know what the 10th canto is mostly about?
Krishna.
It's about Krishna, yeah. So the 9th cantos are leading up to the 10th canto, and they're preparing us so we can enter into that. Thank you so much. Okay, what is the nature of the verse I'm going to read now? As I just described it? Can anybody remember? It's quintessential attitude for devotional service. This verse says, O my Lord, one who earnestly waits for you to bestow your causeless mercy upon him, all the while patiently suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds and offering you respectful obeisances within his heart, words and body, is surely eligible for liberation, for it has become his rightful claim. So even as we suffer through this life in various uncomfortable circumstances, as we go on with our determination to serve Krishna, this make us eligible for the perfection of devotional service. So before we have a little kirtan, let's see if you have any questions. Yes.
I was thinking about, because I was just at Mount Madonna and they recently lost their guru, Baba Das, and he took a vow of silence in 1952. So he's been silent for 66 years. He just had a chalkboard, but he was able to do so much. Like he created Mount Madonna, he created orphanage and 2 ashrams. And I guess my question was, did he take a vow of silence because to reduce the cycle of birth, because our speech can create future lives? Like, is that why people take a vow of silence, to reduce karmic consequences?
Well, I don't know all the reasons that people do. They may have their own reasons. But in general, that's the idea. The idea is that my interaction with the world can cause complexities, therefore I won't speak. And I don't want to ascribe any motive to anybody who does, because everyone has different reasons for doing that. But I will say that there are 2 ways that scriptures describe being silent. There are different ways that you can be silent. And this relates to what Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad-gita, which is a very interesting concept of working without reaction. He says, one who sees action in inaction and action in inaction is a wise person. And what he means by that is there's a way in which to interact with the world, including using one's speech, even if one is loquacious, very talkative, or has an occasion to speak a lot. One can speak in such a way that one doesn't get entangled. If the speech is used for a higher purpose, as service, then one doesn't become entangled or obligated to any karma. And so the bhakti yogis actually value speaking a lot, and they don't hold back in speaking. Like you haven't noticed me holding back at all tonight. Not that I'm much of a bhakti yogi or anything, but I'm following those who are. And so the idea is that everything in this world is transformable, just like an iron rod. It seems like such a solid element. Or however, if you take the iron rod and you put it in hot fire and you leave it there long enough, it will transform into fire. And I've seen it even recently when I was in Japan, in Takayama. There are blacksmiths there, and they put these iron rods in the fire, and then they stoke it hotter and hotter. And when you come back, the whole rod is glowing hot. It's fire. It's transformed. So similarly, whatever material elements we have, including our tongues or any of our limbs or senses, when we engage them in service, then they become transformed. They become transcendentalized. So actually nothing's material ultimately. It's all due to consciousness. And when we use material things in a higher service, they become spiritualized. This is the science taught by Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita. To back it up, he says, Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagnau Brahmanohutam Brahmaiva Tenagantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhina. This is a verse which describes how using material things for a higher cause, for a spiritual cause, transforms them. So you can speak and do all these kinds of things and not create any karma. And you can do all kinds of other things too, but if the motive is centered on service, selfless service to the our original divine source, then it becomes purified. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Hey, any more questions?
We have an online question.
We have an online question. Let's hear that.
So this is from Rohit Prabhu. Wonderful discourse, Maharaj. A quick question. Sometimes, while patiently tolerating the reactions of karma, while praying and expecting Lord's mercy ultimately, there are chances sometimes that one may be overwhelmed by the torments of karma and quit the process out of resentment and hopelessness. How to recuperate oneself after such a predicament?
Well, the way to recuperate from any predicament. First, I'd like to hear what a predicament is. If somebody has a dictionary. But apparently there are quite a few predicaments here in this world. But the way to recover, first of all, it's best thing is to stay ahead by being steady in one's practice. And if somehow or other we fall behind and we become overwhelmed by circumstances, then the advice given in the Srimad Bhagavatam and elsewhere is to resume your service at whatever level you can and continue it till you get back up to speed. Because inevitably we're going to face predicaments in this world and a complex situation and suffering of all kinds. You found it?
Yes.
Okay, what's a predicament? Just to see if we have any predicaments. He'll read the definition, you say if you have a predicament or not. Okay. She's our official dictionary person. Okay.
A difficult, unpleasant or embarrassing situation.
Difficult, unpleasant?
Or embarrassing.
Or embarrassing. Anyone? Anyone? Okay, go ahead.
In Aristotelian logic, each of the 10 categories, often listed as substance or being, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, posture, having or possession, action and passion.
Just tell us where the word comes from.
It comes from late Latin, Middle English, predicament, late Latin, predicamentus, sometimes predicated, from the sense category, arouse the sense state of being or condition, hence unpleasant situation.
Unpleasant. Unpleasant or embarrassing situation. So it's inevitable that we'll come across these situations in this world, even when we're practicing bhakti. So first of all, it's important to fortify ourselves, knowing that these things will come up. And the best way to fortify oneself is to have a strong spiritual practice. As if we have take a preemptive posture, that is, we stay above the possible predicaments by being transcendental to them, by practicing regularly, for instance, our chanting. If you regularly practice your chanting and hearing, especially from the Bhagavad-gita, you'll be much less susceptible to the changes that happen in the material world. Once a disciple of Srila Prabhupada asked him, why is Maya so strong? And Prabhupada said, it's not that Maya is so strong, it's that your motive is so weak. He said then, if you keep yourself very healthy and fit physically, then you don't fall sick very easily. And he said similarly, if you keep yourself spiritually fit, you don't fall victim to Maya very easily. You have to stay spiritually fit. But if you do happen to become overwhelmed at some point, then all you have to do is pick up your practice again at whatever level you can do it and continue, and Krishna will help to reinstate you. And in this purport, the last verse I just read, the advice that I'm going to leave you with from Srila Sridhar Swami. He was a very famous commentator from the Bhakti school from thousands of years ago. In commenting on this verse, he points out, because this verse mentions inheritance, that you will inherit the kingdom of God, basically, if you just stay steady throughout your life. So he says, what is the duty of the son of a very wealthy person? What is the only and main duty? Stay alive. That's right. So then he says, so similarly, for us practitioners of bhakti, our main duty, our only duty, is to stay alive. One way or another, stay alive spiritually. You have to find a way, because all of us have, we have diverse circumstances we're dealing with, complicated situation. Find one way or another to stay alive in your practice of bhakti, and you'll inherit the kingdom of God. It's not a lot to ask, actually. We're only here for a few seconds. I was just up the coast for a few days, and I was watching the ocean, and I was watching the geographical changes that have been etched in the rocks, the tunnels that have been dug by the waves, and I was thinking, I'm here, I come visit every once in a while, look, and you know, I'm going to be around for a few decades here in this puny little life I have. It's been roaring out there for thousands, tens of thousands, millions of years. What's my life in comparison to these geographical moves and formations? It's just a flash in time. So if one can remember that context and stay engaged in the practice of spiritual life somehow or other throughout this life, then one will be very successful. It's a great opportunity, so you can take advantage of it. So take advantage of the yoga of the tongue, and remember to keep your tongue moving with the mantra whenever you can. And if you constantly keep that vibration going, then your life will become sublime. You'll get intelligence, how to move forward properly. You'll be protected. And this is the sum and substance of all the teachings of bhakti. Keep the vibration going somehow or other. Possible? Say yes.
Yes.
Say it a little more enthusiastically.
Yes.
Okay, good. Let's do a little chanting, and then I have to go because I'm flying to the East Coast early in the morning, and I still haven't packed. So, can we chant?
Yes.
Priya Kishori, will you play harmonium? I'll start with a couple invocation mantras, and then we'll chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Shri Mate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Do you know that new tune? Okay. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna. Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. What? Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. You know the third part? You do it? You know it? Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Finish on one. Finish on one. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Premanande been an unforgettable evening for me, seeing all of you here and having time with you right here in San Francisco. I never thought I'd see the day, but it's my heart's wish come true. So thank you very much for coming out on this cold, rainy night. And I'll look forward to seeing you all again soon as possible. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman, hey, Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman, Nachari Marman.